Department of Community Development will be coming back to council with a list of items that they feel as though we should fund with the balance of our housing mitigation funds. I would like to have the Sunnyvale School District to have the opportunity to work and educate the council of what they have done in the past, are up to date on housing for teachers. For example, they've identified a site, a potential site in the city of San Jose. I'd like to listen to what they have to say so that we'll have the benefit of that before we go into our meeting on December 17th and decide on housing mitigation funds. Thank you.
Councilmember Risch, your second.
I think it's a great idea. Thanks for proposing it, John.
Okay. Director, do you have a question?
Yeah, just if I could just add one thing. We will not be providing a specific list of how all those funds should be allocated, but rather be recommending policy for allocation of those funds. So don't expect to see a list of projects that fully allocates those funds on the 17th. Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion of the motion on the table? Seeing none, please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Very good. Other comments from council? Okay, seeing none, I will make a suggestion. The Vice Mayor and I have had a couple of meetings with all of the board and commission chairs and vice chairs in order to examine the relationship between the council and the commissions and to identify problem areas and talk about specific actions that we could take in order to make improvements. The first meeting was held on September 17th, which identified a number of concerns. A follow-up meeting was held on October 28th, which proposed a number of actions, a number of things that could be corrected. And I've distributed to the council a recap of the meeting of October 28th and its recommendations. I worked with the city attorney to identify those actions that would require council action in order to implement. And I've passed out a memo listing what those actions are. Tonight what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask that those 6 actions identified as requiring council action be placed on a future agenda, and I'd also like to invite my colleagues who I hope have had a chance to look at this to suggest any other actions that may be appropriate. Councilmember Reeder.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think you have my suggestions of some modifications in those that were sent to you last week. Modifications in language and priorities in terms of making some of those suggestions encouraging as opposed to mandates.
Well, yeah, that's all grist for the debate when we consider these as actions. What I want to make sure is we get all the different things onto the table so we can talk about them, have public hearing
just as
about
long
them.
if the policies then if the proposals are represented in neutral fashions rather than absolutes is the way. So I think it needs some working in the way it's presented. If in fact you really want to make it objective, so that people have an opportunity to discuss them.
Well, what I will volunteer to do when we get this agendized and when a date's there, obviously I have to write up a report for the council to consider. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to work with you on what that report says so that your concerns can be addressed before they come before the entire council. I guess that means that you and I are one of those ad hoc subcommittees for a moment. Okay. But anyway, I did identify 6 areas. I'd like to read them off. One is requiring commissions to make annual presentations to the council. Number 2 is directing staff to bring unranked study items to commissions for review prior to ranking the ranking process. Number 3 is suggestions for ways that the City Council can give feedback to commissions about their recommendations. Number 4 is requiring board and commission input during the annual study issues workshop and the annual budget workshop as appropriate. Number 5 is annual visits by the mayor and vice mayor to each board and commission. Number 6 is annual joint study sessions between the council and each commission. And what I would like to make sure is that those are the 6 things that we ought to consider when we have this on the agenda. Councilmember Risch.
I'd like to add maybe one other thing, and I don't know how to do it, but that there's been some instances where I think outside groups who come for potential action tend to bypass boards and commissions in terms of the process and come right at the end to the council. So maybe some way that we could work to encourage outside groups to take advantage of the whole process whenever they want to comment on legislation, to involve the boards and commissions. So does that make sense?
Okay, so clarify the guidelines for what actions ought to come to commissions before they come to the council?
Yeah, and it's more encourage and make it clear to outside organizations. I think, I'll give you an example. I believe that the BMR ordinance, I think there were some entities that came to us that didn't really make their case known to the Housing and Human Services Commission. So like to emphasize outside groups that the process starts at the board and commissions, not at the council necessarily. So work with that. I don't know how to do that.
Something to explore. Okay. Well,
And I had several occasions when I was on the Bicycle Advisory Committee where members of the public came to policy issues almost directly to the council that dealt with issues rather than working with the BPAC in the start of the process.
okay, so basically they didn't give their input at the commission level, so